volume of attendees, all callers will remain muted to eliminate any background noise. As we go through the slide deck today, you will see a number of hyperlinks as well as contact email addresses. Please know that we are recording this webinar and it will be shared next week, so you can explore those hyperlinks and have the other information available to you after the call today. We still have some folks joining in. We'll go ahead and get started, and knowing that this will be recorded, we'll be able to share, and those that might be joining later can watch the recording next week. So thanks everyone for dialing in. The purpose of this webinar is to provide information and create awareness of the current drug shortages and to ensure our EMS community is braced for these shortages that are expected to carry on for several months. I'm Stacey Barksdale Price, Senior Product Manager at Boundtree Medical, and today I will provide an overview of products that are currently on national shortage and offer insights from a distributor's point of view into the shortage situation. I'm joined today by Dr. Jim Augustine. Dr. Augustine is an emergency physician and a member of the Board of Directors of the American College of Emergency Physicians. He serves as a clinical professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. Jim is the chair of the National Clinical Governance Board for U.S. Acute Care Solutions in Canton, Ohio. Dr. Augustine served as chair for the Joint Commission Hospital Professional Technical Advisory Committee and on the Board of Commissioners. He's the vice president of the Emergency Department Benchmarking Alliance and a national consultant, author, and speaker on emergency department operations and design. Dr. Augustine has had a special interest in drug shortages since they started back in 2011. He has presented on this topic within a number of forums, and we appreciate him joining us today on the webinar to offer his insights and discuss some coping strategies seen in EMS during times of drug shortages. On today's webinar, we will. Oh, thanks for being here, Jim. I appreciate it. On today's webinar, we will cover a number of topics from what is on shortage, the known causes of the shortages, and coping strategy ideas to help prepare for these long-term back orders. There will be a question and answer period, assuming that we have a few minutes at the end. Please feel free to send in your questions during the presentation through the webinar message board. The question and answer period will be facilitated by Jay Plants, Marketing Manager at Boundtree. Jay will be monitoring the message board throughout the webinar, and he will pull some questions from that message board for Dr. Augustine and I to take at the end of the presentation. In 2012, we experienced the first real impact of national drug shortages, affecting numerous emergency drugs within our market. At that time, the emergency prefilled syringes and other products were unavailable from manufacturers or were only available in very limited quantities. While the reasons for the shortages back then are different than they are today, we are experiencing the same level of negative impact and concern. There is limited to no product in the distribution network for a number of drugs that are used every day in EMS. So what items are involved in the current drug shortages? At Boundtree, 74% of the back orders that we are seeing are resulting from 4 drugs: atropine, dextrose, epi, and bicarb. On this slide, you'll see multiple formats of the same drug are on back order. Atropine Life Shield, atropine Luer Jets, atropine answer syringes are on back order. There isn't a 1 milligram format readily available. Both IMS and Pfizer are releasing product on a very limited basis, once a month or less, and the quantities are not sufficient to satisfy customer back order quantities. This is the same for dextrose. D50 products are on back order, as well as D10 and D5 bags. Epi 1 to 10 is on the shortage list, but the Epi 1-to-1 ampules and vials are available. Sodium bicarb is on shortage. However, in that instance, the FDA has found and is allowing an Australian company to export a 10 ml vial. That product will only be available directly from the manufacturer. That company contact information can be found on the ASHP website, as well as on the Boundtree backorder report. In 2012, I recall the shortages having a really heavy impact for about 3 to 4 months. The chart on this slide shows the activity at that time and shows that things have been fairly quiet on the drug shortage front since then. With the current drug shortages, we started seeing symptoms in May, and over the last 3 weeks, there have been 20 new items added to our weekly backorder report. Pfizer has clear dates of the third and fourth quarters, so it's possible that the current drug shortages could span a 6 to 8 month period in total. Many want to know the reasons for the drug shortages. There's very limited public information currently available from the manufacturers. What we do know is the current shortages are related to operational and manufacturing issues. You may be aware that Pfizer acquired Hospira injectables a number of months ago. The transition was finalized in mid-April. We understand that some of the delays that we all have experienced with Pfizer products were related to the operational challenges that occurred during that transition. However, the emergency prefilled syringes are related to a different problem, a manufacturing issue of the syringe component themselves. And these back orders are the back orders, and these are the back orders that are affecting all of us and will continue to affect us for the next several months. When the delays started to occur with Pfizer, IMS also started to experience fulfillment challenges with their Learjets as they saw an influx of orders for entities trying to compensate for the lack of Pfizer product available. So until Pfizer fully recovers, IMS's product will also be on shortage. It is very important that there be ongoing awareness of the products on the drug shortage list and any new product information that may be available during the next 6 months. We recommend a number of resources for ongoing monitoring of the shortages. The FDA and the ASHP, which stands for American Society of Health System Pharmacists, drug shortage sites are very helpful. They are not always current or reflecting the experience we are feeling in EMS, but they are very helpful sites to monitor. A few weeks ago, there was a webinar on the current drug shortages held by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response. A link to that webinar can be found within the hyperlink on this slide. Lastly, the weekly backorder report that we issue out from Boundary is also a good resource, providing up-to-date information on the backorders most affecting our customers. So let's talk about some best practices and coping strategies you may want to consider during these times of shortages. From a distributor's point of view, we recommend that you look 6 to 8 weeks ahead for your product needs and order in advance. Just-in-time ordering is not an option. In the past, we've witnessed several agencies being caught off guard regarding the shortages. They were unaware that there were shortages and their stock was nearly depleted at the time they were placing their orders. This puts them at the back of the line for fulfillment. While you should order well in advance, we highly recommend that you don't place hoarding orders. That would mean placing one huge order that would represent months and months worth of inventory. This worsens the overall impact for the entire customer base. If customers over-order on a single order, it creates a bottleneck effect that affects the entire country across the board. Distributors like Boundary are getting monthly allocations from these manufacturers with quantities that are less than our customers' usual demand. So an excessive order puts a serious strain on the entire system. We would next advise you to be aware of your expiration dates. You need to be highly aware of the expiration dates on hand, moving stock that will expire the soonest to locations that it will be used. Avoid pulling the soon to expire stock until as late as possible. We have heard of some agencies pulling products 60 days prior to expiration. Knowing that for large agencies, this process of pulling soon to expire and restocking takes considerable time, we encourage you to look at ways to allow for the product to stay in service as long as possible. In regards to expiration dates, in case you weren't aware, there was some really great news recently where the FDA posted extended shelf life information on a number of Pfizer prefilled syringes. A link to that information can be found within the FDA drug shortage website, and it is a hyperlink on this slide that you can visit when we share the deck next week. Lastly, many ask if they should put orders in with multiple vendors. Since this could be seen as a form of hoarding, you should use caution when ordering with multiple vendors, that the quantities you have on order in total don't exceed what your usage requires. It's also important that you ensure that the vendor that you are ordering medications from has the proper licensure. All distributors should have a license to distribute into the state you yourselves are located in. You can validate any distributor's licensure through the FDA's website. Again, not only is a distributor required to be registered in their home state, they must also be registered to distribute products into every state that they ship. Qualified distributors must also provide you with a transaction report that complies with the FDA Drug Supply Chain Security Act, also known as DSCSA. Purchasing from a vendor who is not in compliance with licensure or DSCSA regulations puts your agency at risk. Now I invite Dr. Jim Augustine to share other coping strategies and best practices that he has seen over the years during the times of drug shortages. Dr. Augustine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Stacey. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. It is unfortunate we're here, but thanks for taking your time to plan ahead on what has really been a long-term evolving problem related to supplies of medicines that are very important for patient care. At this point, the majority of the medicines that we're going to talk about are paramedic level medicines, moving into, of course, the emergency department, and are medicines that are meant for injectable use. We've had relatively rare situations where medicines for oral use have been involved, and we've had no instances where transdermal use medicines have been involved in the shortage. So it's very important that we evolve an incident management team and an action plan. And going back to 2012, that is where we began this program, was when we had extreme medicine shortages related to critical drugs for the care of patients. Those shortages extended from the pre-hospital environment into the emergency department and the hospital environment. And therefore, an incident management plan looking at regional resources and regional applications will be important related to this. I want to follow up on one of Stacey's points, which is related to establishing several suppliers of your medicine. We looked at that strategy early on. I apologize for that. I don't know where that came from.
Jim, I can hear you fine.
Okay. We looked at that strategy. We looked at that strategy early on of establishing several suppliers. And what I want to remind you is your main supplier is still your best source of both information and product. And that the issue related to this is not the distribution network. This is the manufacturing network. So if one supplier can't get a hold of supplies of any of our critical medicines, other suppliers will not be able to either. What happens occasionally if you are establishing a relationship with several suppliers is that you get medicines that have very, very short times where they're usable. And those products may be as expensive as full-line products and cause you significant problem when it comes to putting them in the field. So for our management strategies, we have the 3 Ps, which are protocol changes, packaging changes, and point of care support and education that revolve around an incident management plan and active inventory management. Next, please. We have safety mandates as we do in all of our care of patients. And it's particularly important when we're talking here about our critical care drugs. So this is sugar, bicarb, atropine, magnesium, calcium, our RSI drugs. So these are all critically important. And the last thing we want is for our personnel not to be confident on the use of these critical medicines. If you're changing packaging, changing sourcing, changing concentrations of medicine, and changing placement in your usual drug boxes and dispensing devices, that can result in lack of confidence of your personnel in pulling out and using medicines. One of the responses that can occur is that your, particularly ALS personnel, will just say, I'm too confused, I'm not confident in what is being given to me, and therefore I'm not going to use medicine in pre-hospital care. That is the last thing we want to do. And more importantly, it is to put together the practices, policies, protocols, and packaging that will support the ongoing use of important medicines for patient care. One of the ways that that's done is looking at packaging. If we have alternate medicines that are being used for similar purposes, for example, pain medication, control of nausea, for RSI, and for critical care, if we're substituting medicines, what helps personnel sometimes is that we color code the medications that are being used and make sure that the color coding relates to its use in the drug box. We took some of our packaging for critical care medicine and put it in red. And on the outside of the red package, or a red little Ziploc bag, the crews would know that critical care medicines were contained within that red bag. Maybe appropriately, as we worked through different nausea medicines, that was in a green bag or had a green label. And appropriate dosing for adult and pediatric patients was put on the green label. So there's a variety of point-of-care packaging options for you to use to make sure your personnel continue to be confident in what medicine they're pulling out, what dosing they should use for either adult or pediatric patients, and the fact that the medicine that they're pulling out is in fact for the purpose that they're pulling it out for. Next, please. A lot of this process we knew began at the state level because so much of the EMS and frankly medical care process is managed at the state level. It is really important for regions and for EMS agencies to be confident in their work with state level EMS management. That may include the state board that oversees emergency medical services. In some cases, it involves the pharmacy board, the health board, and the medical board. And for those of you who have functions between the pre-hospital environment and the emergency department, you know you will have to flex between these different boards. In some cases, the state boards, and we'll talk here about the state EMS board, is very familiar and kept up to date on the medication shortage and issues related to it. They can, in some cases, adjust their rules and regulations and allow a flex between different types of medicines. This happened when we abruptly ran out of our dextrose in our injectable form and had to move to dextrose bags. We very quickly developed the education related to it after we had consulted with the state EMS board to make sure that the use of an alternate form of dextrose administration, which was a bag of D10, was a substitute for D50. It was important for the state to know that because in our drug license that had been submitted, the only form of dextrose that had been on it would either have been D50 or D25. If an inspector came to look at our ambulances, some ambulances might have still some remaining but still good vials of D50. In other cases, they were going to find bags of D10. And so it was very important for the state to understand we may have alternate forms of similar medicines distributed between different bags as we were trying to stay ahead of expiration dates. This state integration will be very, very important as we look at implementing the FDA extension notice that just came out last week. If you are going to use medicines that are the epinephrine, atropine, and dextrose solutions that have been put on this extended expiration, you are going to, as an administrator in the EMS system, have to have those printed notices from the FDA that are available from the web link that Stacey gave you earlier. You're going to have to explain those to your personnel so that they understand why the vials of those 3 drugs are going to be used beyond the posted expiration dates. If an inspector from your state EMS agency comes to talk to either the leadership or the crews, you're going to need to have that reference available to the FDA materials. And everyone over the next year is going to have to understand that expiration process is very different than what we have worked with over all of the other years we've been doing this in emergency medical services. So it's important that you fulfill all state rules and regulations, but as we begin to, if you will, adapt to this shortage situation, It's going to be very important for you to stay in contact. For those of you who are involved in state-level EMS management, please understand this information is going to go out, and it will be important for the state, as it is done in a number of places where I work. The state is letting the EMS organizations know about the changes in their rules, regulations, compliance programs, and other best practices that are related to safety. Very important that you all stay in touch with what is happening at the state level, because that's our primary focus of regulation in our industry. Next slide. What does the process of active inventory management look like? Well, this is about, for each of the medicines that's in our drug box, knowing alternatives, knowing if there are not medication but other alternative therapies that are going to be used. We have to know how to apply those. We also have to know, again, any change in what is in our medications and in our drug boxes greatly affect the people in the field. I am just like all of you. I've worked in the field 35 years. I've worked with the same drug boxes for many, many years. In the middle of the night, I have a sick patient and I need epinephrine. I'm reaching into the place that I know that epinephrine is present. And lo and behold, there's nothing in that space, or there's a different size container, or it has been concentrated differently, and that's a big jolt. And it involves all of the memory that goes with emergency medical care that we have embedded into the personnel that are doing this. So it's very important, as you have to change medication preparations, concentrations, and placement within the drug bag, that this be done in a way that is very, very friendly to the personnel who are trying to use it. Another big change, if we are going to try to preserve our medicines and make them useful for their entire life to their expiration date that's either posted or has been extended by the FDA, it is important that as little of that medicine gets contaminated as possible. EMS, by definition, runs our medicines out into hot conditions and cold conditions and sunlight in certain circumstances. And those are the things that will cause that medication to break down a little bit more quickly. As we have gotten to more shortages, we have in some cases had to pull some of the medicines back so that we don't have as many available in the bedside drug boxes, and instead keep them centrally controlled environment so that they're not exposed to heat and to cold and to sunlight, and therefore will be useful for longer periods of time. Keeping stuff central also allows us to more carefully ensure that any drugs that are nearing their expiration date are at the site of care where they're most likely to be used. So active inventory management is taking the medicines that are closest to the expiration date and putting them in the place that they're most likely to be used. For non-controlled substances, in some places you can even move them into the emergency department, exchange out non-controlled substances so that an amp of D50 or an amp of epi is at the site where it will be used before its expiration date, and a fresher vial put back into its place, one that has a longer expiration date that can be used for future patient care. So that's all part of an active inventory management program, looking at where the medications can best be used and where some medications in certain circumstances can be kept in a more controlled environment so that they're unlikely to get either contaminated or to not be as effective when used in patient care. Next, please. What I've shown you here is what we developed, and a number of places have developed, looking at our medications, their shortage status, where it is carried, any therapeutic substitutions, and a management plan related to this. So for each of our medicines, we would make this list available and know what the status is of that medicine. Each week, we would place in red the medicines that are in the shortage situations, whether it's critical shortage or a pending shortage. Where it is carried for us meant Is this carried in our bike team drug boxes? Is it carried in our engine drug boxes? Is it carried in our ALS med unit drug boxes? Is it carried in the ALS supervisor drug boxes? Any other sites where it may be placed that are still the responsibility of the department? And then what is its status perhaps in our central supply storage areas? The next column says what are the therapeutic substitutions for that medicine, if there are any. And in some cases, atropine, for example, there really are no therapeutic substitutions that increase heart rate or are useful for the rescue situations that atropine is used for. And so we've had to look at transcutaneous pacing, and in some cases at our WMD caches to be able to develop alternative care methods for the patient. So it's very important that you look drug by drug at your situation and again develop a management plan, and then you can color that up, and then for you all who are in leadership positions, know where you need to carry out your plans related to what type of drug boxes and places and what might be available as a therapeutic substitution. Next, please. The packaging changes that we're looking towards, again, pain medicines we colored up with the blue label, seizure medicines with the red label, nausea medicines green, sedatives in yellow. Then personnel looking into their drug box, again, not finding the medicine in a familiar place, would be most familiar with these labeling changes. And with the labeling changes at the time of either medicine acquisition from the central supply area, in the drug box, perhaps on their computers at the patient's bedside, we have the information that's necessary in order to safely administer the medicine at the right dose, and again for adult or pediatric patients. As we're dancing between some of these medicines and even in different drug boxes and on different units at the same time, it's really important again that the crews be very comfortable with what they're picking out of their drug box and using for patient care. There's also been a number of crew notification processes put into place. And in the departments around the country, I'm involved in the Eagles with the other big system medical directors. We have shared our best practices about crew notification. In some cases, these came across as educational brochures, placed in the medic units, placed in the transition of crew sites, placed where they pick up their drug boxes, at the hospitals where they pick up their exchange drug boxes. We put out email blasts, we put out text messages to make sure that the crews know about changes in medicine, changes in concentration, changes in preparation that may be important for them to know about. There's also individual medical director notices that go out to the crews that can be in the form of mini webinars like this. That can be in form of just-in-time education that goes out over an email blast. It can be some learning sessions that are available so that medical directors get very involved in this process and the crews know that they have the support of their medical director and can address any questions that come about with their medical director as they arise. Next slide. We have to look at safety, and it's really important that we optimize the use of all of these drugs across the entire region. So in our county, we sat down together and began a process in 2012 where once a month we would sit down with members of the local emergency management agency, the EMS and first response providers, the pharmacy leaders from the hospitals, and even our county Department of Health, who thought that there was an opportunity for them in certain cases to contribute assistance here. With that group sitting together, we said, you know, where is our shortage? So we took our med list and went through our shortage areas. At that time, EpiPens were not available. There was a real problem with the community expecting themselves or parents of children who had significant anaphylactic risks we had no EpiPens. The regional group came up with a training message for the community, came up with training messages for emergency medical service personnel, training messages for emergency department personnel, so that everyone in the community was aware EpiPens were short, or not available, and were becoming more expensive. That issue has gotten even worse today with the pricing and availability of epinephrine pens, particularly those that are appropriate for children. With this big group in place, we could then educate the community and educate each other about the shortage situation. If there were supplies available, in many cases the Department of Health knew which pharmacies might have junior EpiPens. And then when a prescription is written in the emergency department for an adult parent to get an EpiPen for a child, they would know where the most likely site was where pediatric EpiPens would be available. When the EMS crews went out on a child with an anaphylactic reaction, they first of all had the knowledge that the parents likely don't have an EpiPen or may be contemplating the use of an expired EpiPen, or that it was so expensive that the parents were not able to get the EpiPen for the child. So that education kind of across the board really works very effectively in being able to use community resources. Flip side of this was emergency drugs that were short, and at that time we had an extreme shortage of magnesium sulfate. Magnesium sulfate used particularly for the group of patients who are having seizures at the end of their pregnancy. We had such shortage between the hospitals and EMS that we developed a single supply of mag sulfate, and wherever that patient originated or their care was going to be ongoing, they would essentially have the entire community's supply of mag sulfate available for their care. And even though each individual EMS unit and emergency department did not have mag sulfate, they had the resources of the region available with a phone call that would allow them to exchange that put that very important medicine in place where it was needed for emergency patient care. Next slide. So this can be wrapped kind of into a single slide here, and this kind of shows you again the 3 Ps: protocol changes, point of care support, and packaging, and then across the wide group that encompasses emergency medical services, that we can let each of these people be a contributor in order for our action plans to work out across an entire community. Next slide, please. So a regional resource management group is important. It's important, again, for that group to interact with the state, make sure that we're compliant with any regulations and rules, that any inspectors coming through would have the right information available, and that in particular our personnel both in emergency medical service and in the emergency department were prepared. Next slide. Finally, we knew that this shortage may get worse, and so we developed a 3-level incident action plan. Level 1 that you see on the left here is kind of advisory. When we were setting up for this, we have frankly extended well beyond when this was advisory, and we were beginning to think through this planning process and implementation and educate our personnel. We are really in the level 2 phase now for most of our medicines, and that is where there are moderate shortages. We developed a trigger, we developed the action plans, phasing, and then some of you would recognize we have incident management elements in here, and that is where that would be carried through. On the right-hand side, and highlighted in red, are level 3 for either individual drugs or for a number of medicines when there are severe shortages, and the action plans that would be put into place when we had reached those critical levels. You may look at developing a very similar 3-level plan for groups of medicines, but again, extending across the wide range from public health, the hospitals, emergency medical services, and first responders, and through to definitive care, which a drug like magnesium sulfate was necessary in the critical care and labor and delivery units, as well as the traditional emergency areas. Next slide. So the federal government is interested in helping us. Stacey has laid out the hyperlinks for you. There was an ASPR webinar that was done a couple weeks ago We have new action from the FDA that really allows us to use available medicines beyond expiration dates as long as we take into account the regulatory things that we need to do to be compliant in that area. We need to budget because there's a significant financial impact in the increasing price of our medicines. For those of you like I am in the big opiate fentanyl overdose zones, you know what your costs alone in Narcan have done over the last couple of years. Much less now. Our last vial of epinephrine that we obtained, a 1 cc 1 to 1,000 epinephrine price has gone up to $17 a vial. So there's a significant financial impact of what has occurred over the last few years. And it's very important that the people that are budgeting for our process understand increasing expense related to these action plans and an increasing expense related to the medicines themselves. Very important that the ED and EMS be online so that no one is surprised that patients come in and they've either been given medicines or haven't been able to be given medicines. And it's very important that the safety of this be explained to the community who may have certain expectations when you come in. There's a diabetic patient who you've cared for years, and this time you walk in and rather than waking them up with an amp of D50, you now have a bag hanging over the top of it. The family may not understand what you're doing. That's very different. And we've talked about the EpiPens already. There's a real impact on patients and their family members as well. This is a credibility opportunity for all of you to develop a good action plan and to make sure that your crews are confident in the approaches that you're taking to this, and that we're using all of our regional resources in order to be able to address. You can also develop some really good point of care teaching, point of care education, point of care safety programs that then could extend out in other areas as needed. So this is a real opportunity for you to be able to show leadership in this area and be able to develop some really good elements for safety and quality and patient care that are important to us. That's really the management plans that we have developed and used to date. Stacey has some items on the next slide as we begin to wrap this up, and you all should get ready for your questions. Stacey.
Thank you, Dr. Augustine. That was very, very helpful. While we had you, I thought it would be a great opportunity to review a few other updates that have occurred in the pharmaceutical world over the last several months or more, just to make sure everyone is aware. Dr. Augustine alluded to the first there in his latter comments regarding financial impact. While the EPI change isn't related to a backorder situation, there has been a major change in the landscape of the product that's in the marketplace today. For those of you who are not aware, Pfizer has discontinued their EPI 1-to-1 ampule. As you know, this item has been a staple for many, many years. And at the same time, IMS has discontinued their 30 ml vial, which was also around forever. The reasons behind these discontinuations are related to the FDA process. When the FDA first started back in the 70s, they allowed for the first company that filed an NDA, which is a new drug application for a given product, that any subsequent product that would come to market, they allowed it to be grandfathered under the original NDA. So the items that were launched after the original didn't require an NDA and were grandfathered. Several years ago, the FDA changed their position on that and decided that they wanted all drugs to have an NDA in place that were any drug that was on the market, even those that had been grandfathered for decades. So from what we understand, the process for filing an NDA is very time-consuming as well as costly, and the process was that the manufacturers could not continue to manufacture and distribute during the course of that NDA process, that they had to stop and they would have to wait for their approval. So rather than going through that expensive and time-consuming process, it's our understanding that those companies had decided to exit the market. So the good news is that there is another ampule, EPI ampule out there, as well as a 30 ml vial. But the bad news is the ampule is about 4 times the cost of the Pfizer product. So this will have a very major impact on our customers. The manufacturer of the sole ampule now, indicates that it reflects the FDA approval, process that they had to go through, as their epi ampule is the only FDA approved product on the market in an ampule format. The next one on the slide here is IV fluids, and I'm sure you all, are familiar that this is not a new situation when it comes to an allocation. And when we say allocation, it means that there is product in the distribution network, but it's not at the volumes that may satisfy all customer orders or needs, or just at that level, that there can't be any increases in the quantities needed. This situation has been going on now for at least 4 years from my experience. It might be back a couple of years from that, from my memory. But Bebron, Baxter, and Hospira had all had their product on allocation. And Baxter and Bebron continue to have their product on allocation. Bebron is more restricted on quantities. They aren't accepting any new business and on their products with IV fluids, and Baxter is maintaining an allocation rate that's been pretty consistent over the last couple of years. Hospira's IV products were sold to ICU, where the injectables were sold to Pfizer. So ICU now has the Hospira products, the IV bags. And for those of you who may be aware, they've always been a very premium product and priced as such. So they hadn't been allocated, and there is indication that they have greater capacity, but the price point, I think, has been a deterrent for movement into that direction. I did want to let you know that there are other companies coming to market in this space, which is very good for all of us from a supply standpoint, and perhaps even pricing might keep the cap on things a little bit. We know that when there's more manufacturers in a given space, that kind of contains the pricing, where you may have fewer manufacturers. So we know that Mylan will be launching a 500 ml saline bag soon, and we've heard that there's a couple of other manufacturers exploring the space, so that's encouraging. The last thing on the slide is the RSI meds, and this is a very interesting segment. Rocuronium is on the backorder list, and it is expected to continue to be on backorder for several months. But there's a little bit of a background story on this, on these line of medications that I just wanted to mention. They are considered a considered a restricted product from the various manufacturers, and that they are trying to narrow the distribution channels that these products are utilized, and they are, in the end, they are trying to avoid distribution into the correctional facility space, as these drugs can be used in capital punishment. So if you do spend time on some of those resources that I mentioned earlier, particularly the ASHP website, you'll find that I believe it's Mylan that they show has availability of rocuronium, but when I spoke to Mylan, they are only distributing the product to the acute care right now, and they're not distributing beyond that. And that's fairly typical when it comes to a shortage, that they tend to service the hospitals first, but there is a concern that with the RSI meds, that even when they become more readily available, that the manufacturers' intentions of limiting the distribution network, it might end up hampering access. So I just wanted to create awareness of that. Pancuronium is one that some of our customers have been inquiring about, and that one is available. It is on the restricted list. So you might want to start looking at some other alternatives of products in this area that may be also off of that restricted medication list. So just a thought there I wanted to share. All right, so now we're going to move on to question and answers. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we are accepting questions through the message board. And Jay Plants, our marketing manager that's on the line, has been monitoring that. So we'll just give another minute or two just to have some things collected, and then we'll ask Jay to present some questions to Dr. Augustine and myself.
Thanks, Stacey. And just as a reminder to folks, we don't have the ability to unmute lines. So if you're doing the raise your hand feature to ask a question, we can't unmute you. So I see Stacey Ingram and Diane Beck and Johnny from Westerville City Fire. If you can ask your questions through the questions area down below. That'll make it easier. Stacey, you ready for some questions that's been coming in?
Yes, Jay, that'd be great.
Okay, so the first one we have here, and we get to the very top of our list. There's been a number, of course, as you can imagine. Laura McKnight asks, are there any rules and regulations associated with the FDA extending the expiration dates on specific drugs, i.e. how to display the new expiration date or any paperwork that's associated with that specific drug?
Dr. Augustine, what practice are you seeing now with this latest FDA movement, sharing of the news of the Pfizer extensions? How will folks execute properly around that?
The FDA did not specify any particular process related to this, and it may be that your state would develop a way for you to post and be able to educate related to this new development. One of the pieces of the FDA extension was that they suggested that the extension not be marked across on the product vial and the product itself. And so it's going to be necessary for you to take, and this will have to be done centrally, that any of those products would have to be tagged in some way so that people would understand what the extended expiration date is for that lot of medication. So the FDA doesn't specify any one particular implementation process, but what they do suggest is that the individual product has to have its expiration, and there's no universal, 1 year past, et cetera. When you look at the FDA notice, I'm looking right now at epinephrine and the epinephrine lots. One of them that was due to expire on 1 January 2017 got extended to 1 October 2017. So no magical figures. You would have to tag that box so that someone would know. In many cases, this would be a tag actually in the drug box for an emergency medical service itself. What they suggested, again, not taking a magic marker and writing it on the exterior box that contains the epinephrine, dextrose, or atropine. So no best practice as yet. Look to the state for any guidance. Make sure that your personnel and any regulators are aware of it. Thank you.
And
Thanks, Jim. Jay, have you got any others?
Yes, we do. In fact, there's a number from different folks that are really anxious to make sure that they get these slides. Do you want to tell Stacey folks how they'll get a copy of the slides and the webinar and when that timing will be?
Sure, I appreciate that. We have been recording the webinar. The audio and the slides will be captured in that recording, and we will be sending an email to those that are registered at Boundtree. We sent an email out last Wednesday with the invitation, and if you got that email, you will automatically receive a copy of the link of the recording. If you registered utilizing another means of communication, we will be communicating that out and making it available on our website. I'll be glad to share my email address at the conclusion if anyone wants to email me directly, but those will be going out after the holiday.
Awesome. We've got another question here, Stacey. It's actually a Boundtree specific question from Richard Cadill. He's asking, how does Boundtree manage backorder status? They, at their department, have station ordering, and they order on a weekly basis, and they are accruing a large amount of product on back order. I don't know if you have any tips.
Yep. Fulfillment is challenging at times with back orders, and we do exercise the FIFO, first in, first out method. If we do see that there's an excessively large quantity on back order, we will look into that particular customer quantity and see if that's out of the norm for them, and may try to work with them on breaking that up. Otherwise, we do fulfill the oldest date received is what would get serviced first. And I appreciate that weekly ordering cadence that you may have established pre-drug shortage, and that would be something that would be encouraged throughout, is to, keep conservative quantities, not exceeding your average usage, and having frequent orders in place for fulfillment.
Terrific. We've got another one here from Mohammed Al-Yami. This question is directed to the doctor. He would like to know what is exactly meant by keeping the meds more central. That was in your portion.
Yeah, thank you. In some departments, they will keep their supplies of medicines decentralized. There will be large boxes of epi, atropine, other medicines kept in the medic units that goes beyond what would their usual usage be. My suggestion, and in particular as it relates to potential expiration date issues, was that if those boxes of medicines were instead kept at a central location and central storage, and that central storage had limited light, it had an environment that was usually kept at the same temperature, that number one, those drugs would be much more likely good when they're finally used, and number two, the central logistics person could take those medications and allocate them out much more carefully, and again closer to their expiration dates, to the busiest ambulances, so that taking boxes off the ambulance rigs, putting them in a central storage area, allocating them out at small lots at a time as needed by the crews. You don't want to make the crews run short, but instead of our decentralized way of having our medicines out on the rigs or out in the stations, that a central logistics point may result in you having the medicines more appropriately used, close to their expiration date. And again, if extension of expiration dates occurs, that you can say our epi was kept in a central environmental controlled area and is much more likely to be useful. Epi and nitroglycerin are two medicines well known to decompose at a little more quick rates. B50 and our other medicines have much less degradation that takes place. Thanks for the question.
We've got another question here. Actually, there's two that are very similar, so I'll ask both of these at the same time. The first one comes from Greg Wolf, and it says, is IMS working with the FDA to extend expiration dates for their medications as Pfizer has done? And then a very similar question from Greg Clyburn is, do I understand correctly that an IMS product shortage results from the Pfizer shortage? And is there an expiration date extension for IMS products?
Thanks, Jay. Yep, and thanks for those questions. And we wondered the same things when we saw those extensions from Pfizer. I reached out to IMS, and they indicated that they don't have the same information that Pfizer has, which means to me that the stability testing that they have doesn't support anything beyond the dating that they have on their products. So no, they will not be working with the FDA for extended expiration dates for their products. I think, was it just simply about the IMS extensions? I think that's the core question there, Jay.
Yes.
Yep. So no, we don't anticipate any extensions on the IMS product. So we only have a few more minutes. If there's a quick question maybe left there, Jay, that you can pull out. Otherwise, the intention will be that we will capture the questions on the message board that have not been answered, and we'll do our best to communicate with those individuals after the webinar concludes.
Okay, yeah, I've got one more here. This comes from Nancy Garrison. She's asking, is there anything the feds are going to do to help prevent future shortages, or know of anything that can stop this in the future?
Dr. Augustine, I know you and I both have heard conversations regarding FDA efforts. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah, the quick answer would be no, we don't know of anything in particular. We have been chasing this issue since 2011. We have a new administration in place that doesn't seem to have changed what is happening. Whatever the internal dynamics are still going on. Nonetheless, all of you being involved in this, all of you who were involved in ASPR, telling the FDA directly how this impacts patient care. All of you who go out into your regions and get some local legislators and administrators involved in this process, we're likely to end up with a quicker resolution. But at this point, I am unaware of any particular actions that are being taken to prevent this from being an ongoing problem. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Dr. Augustine. I appreciate that. And I think what we heard from DC meetings back in 2012 and on the ASPR call that happened a couple of weeks ago is that the FDA continues to want to be notified of anticipated interruptions. I know when I attended a meeting back in 2012, the FDA representative that spoke there said that they're often the last to know of a drug shortage. So that's rather surprising, and I think that the communication has improved. And at that time, there was no requirements for a manufacturer to report either a expected or a live shortage, and they also are seeking, just like in bicarb, the instance of the export that will happen from Australia, they're seeking instances where a product can be brought in from overseas. So we'll see if any other opportunities come in over the next few months on any other products. So we'll wrap up the questions from at this point, and as I mentioned, any that are still in the queue, we will capture and do our best to reach out to those individuals. If you have other questions that you didn't put through the message board, if you would like to email me directly, you can. My address is s4stacey.barksdale@boundtree.com. And we will continue to update our weekly backorder report and communicate important updates through those email communications. We hope you found today's information session to be helpful, and as a result, if you don't already have action plans in place for dealing with drug shortages, that you will consider some of the ideas offered today and work with your medical director as well as internal and external teams to best cope with the effects of the shortages that will likely continue for the next several months. Thank you, Dr. Augustine, for joining me today and offering your valuable insights. We really appreciate you being here. And want to thank everyone who took time out of their day to call in today. We appreciate you dialing in, and I hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Stacey. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Jim. Bye-bye.